Welcome back to Mental Health for Creative Minds. I'm your host, Jessica McGann, TV producer, performer, and coach to creative professionals. Now, the film and theater world can pack a combo punch of some really high highs and also incredibly low lows. And if ever you have wondered, do I belong in this industry? Should I get another job? Am I crazy to think that I can do this? I have great confidence that today's conversation will leave you feeling less alone in your experience and empowered to take back your control and keep moving forward towards your creative aspirations. My guest today is Jodie Davis, an executive producer with over 20 years of experience in the television and digital world. He's significantly influenced how entertainment is produced and consumed in Canada. From bringing red carpet glamour to Canadian events to helping launch one of Canada's first reality shows. In this episode, we delve into Jodie's impressive career, the highs and lows he's faced, and how he manages his mental well-being in this demanding industry. Jodie really understands firsthand the unique challenges and pressures we as creatives face. And in today's conversation, he vulnerably shares his experiences and insights that are sure to help you feel seen, understood, and less alone in your experience. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Jodie, welcome to the podcast. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you, Jess. It's great to be here.
Now, you have had quite an impressive career. And before we get into all the amazing things you have done in your career, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you got your start in this industry and what drew you to it in the first place.
Sure. Yeah. So I always was into sports when I was a kid, especially hockey and baseball and basketball. And I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer. And um, but then I realized I grew up also with a bit of a speech problem, so I couldn't say a lot of the athletes' last names. So I knew this was not going to be something that I would ever 100% fully overcome. So I put that in the back burner, but still love the idea of television, radio, and being part of it. I applied for Ryerson, did not get into Ryerson. I got put on the wait list. So I made it to York, which is my second choice. But York had a very cool program that was just launching when I got there, which was you did a university degree with York, and you got a college diploma with Seneca. So you went to York and Seneca at the same time. So I spent 5 years in post-secondary education. And
What was the name of that program?
It was for radio and television as well.
Okay.
It was called, I think it was called York and Seneca, something as simple as that.
Okay.
And yeah, so I spent 3 years at both schools and bookended with a separate year at York because you obviously couldn't do full time at each school. And yeah, from there I got, while I was there, I got into some small gigs, and just from there was history.
It sounds like you always had a passion for real-time entertainment. Like it was like, were you interested in scripted at any point, or were you always kind of part of that?
Not really. Like, I was definitely real time. Like, at the beginning of my career, I really loved radio, and I still have a soft spot for radio. So like being on the air, as it's happening, saying things as it's happening, like not, and then whatever mistakes you make are in the past, and you move on. And all these sort of first sort of gigs I had were mostly award shows. CBC was doing a lot of the award shows, and I got in while I was still at school, mostly as like production assistant, script assistant, and made my way up from there. So I did like the Junos, the Geminis, the Genies, the NHL Awards. I was on this sort of, cycle for a couple of years. So, and all those were also like live programming, and just the thrill of live is something that can't be matched with scripted, I don't think. But I've never done scripted, so I can't say for sure.
Coming from a theater background, that's how I always I love real time. I work in reality and unscripted, and I love that, like never knowing exactly what to expect, or the heightened emotions or the adrenaline rush of doing something live.
Right.
You mentioned at the beginning of this that you had this dream of being that on-air personality. Did you ever get that chance throughout your career up until this point?
Not really. Like I've done, I still do some radio reporting. So I've done some on air for radio. Never done on air for television. I've, the last couple of years I've been a voter for the Golden Globes, and so I get offered interviews to talk to people in movies and television. So still do that and post that on social and things like that. So like there's a little bit on camera work there, but I don't see it as that. It's just more like, I'm just talking to these people because I've been doing interviews with celebrities for 20 years. So it doesn't it's not anything that I would say you would consider non-air gig. So no.
What a cool gig though, like talking to celebrities and being able to have that opportunity to ask your questions. I feel like there's so many people that would just love to have that opportunity. Do you ever have like friends being like, "Oh, you're interviewing so and so, can you ask them this question for me?"
I don't usually tell people before I'm interviewing someone. So
Smarts.
yeah, so that hasn't really happened. Back when I was at ET and we would be doing interviews with celebrities, it would just be part of our sort of like day-to-day life there. Like we just think of questions and we'd always be, bouncing ideas off each other, like this is what we should ask this person, this is what we should ask this star. So it was sort of common the commonality within the office. But yeah, outside of that, no, I didn't really, again, like try not to tell people who we were interviewing unless, it was someone really, really big.
Probably for the best.
Mhm.
Now, you were kind of at the front lines of bringing reality TV shows into Canada. Can you tell me a little bit about what that process was like? What was that first show that you were working to develop here in Canada? And what kind of resistance or challenges did you face in doing that?
Sure. So I was part of a team that did it. I was no means, the sort of main on it. I was a started off as as sort of production assistant, made my way up to associate producer. It was a show called The Lofters, which was eight aspiring broadcasters living in a downtown loft in Toronto. Um, it was sort of a mix with Big Brother. They were filmed 24/7 in the loft. We had like I think 10 or 12 cameras going at all times.
Was
And
Harissa
then,
Cox on that?
yes, she was. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also Jennifer Hedger, who's now on TSN, and a bunch of other people. So yeah, we did that. And then, we filmed their lives. And, there was a show that aired, The Lofters, on a network called Life Network at the time, which is Slice Network now. That would sort of be like more about the drama and their sort of relationships and how they've handled themselves in the house. And then outside of that, on the internet at the time, we would do half hour to 1 hour shows daily that would be different subjects. So there was a show that was just based on music. There's a show called U8 on Film, which we did on film. And then that one also went to IFC. There was one about the LGBTQ community. There was one about relationships and all this sort of different types of shows programming. So it was television programming that lived online. So as I said, like these people who lived in the loft were aspiring journalists and broadcasters. So they would have, part of their deal about living in the loft is that they would also be hosting TV shows in their house where they lived. So it was pretty unique and a bit ahead of its time with what we were doing. The resistance is that, it only lasted for just under 2 years because it just, it was an expensive show. And at the time, especially the internet was, this is 2001. It wasn't what it is now. People's viewing habits weren't the same. They weren't watching the internet the way, we do now. So it just didn't have the sort of ad support and way to keep up with the costs. Um, and then also some of the resistance was just, we had one person on the show who at one point just didn't want to be on the show anymore. And like you had to deal with that as well. Like I don't think society itself was sort of ready for what sort of impact that had on people inside that loft, like what it was like being on camera 24/7. And we had live feeds of every room except for the bathrooms going. So like it was just it could take a toll. I saw it take a toll on a lot of the people who were in that house.
It sounds very Big Brother-esque in
Hmm.
everything that you are describing.
Yeah. Yeah, but not like Big Brother, as they're there for 2 months and winner walks away with money. There was no winner to this. This was just like, this is your life for a year. um
It was a whole year?
It was a whole year. And their hope was that they would, make it in the TV business. And some did, like as you said, Arissa Cox did, Jennifer Hedger did, but some didn't. And it was hard.
I spent a couple of years working on Big Brother Canada. It was one of my
Hmm.
favorite shows to get to work on. But what was really fascinating from like a mental perspective was how people would start to forget that cameras existed.
Right.
And you would think because they're in it all the time that they would just know and the cameras are everywhere, but they don't. They just becomes like normal life. Did you notice that same kind of uh thing happen on that show where people just kind of forgot? And how did the producers, if you can recall, um pick and choose like the story moments for
Hmm.
a whole year? Like
Hmm.
how often did this air, and how did that system work?
Yeah, so the actual Lofter show that aired on broadcast aired 5 days a week.
Oh, this is Ed TV. Do you remember
Yeah.
that movie, Ed TV?
Yes, basically. So yes, they definitely forgot sometimes the cameras are on. You saw fights, you saw emotions. I think, one of the moments for me, even as a producer, is that, I experienced 9/11 through their eyes. It was to me, I have a different experience of 9/11 than a lot of other people do, because a lot of people were watching news and were glued through TV. I came into the office, and with some other producers, we were watching it through their eyes and how they were experiencing, not really so much for us to experience it. So that's just one example. And, another is like sometimes things were kind of, like the hills, where things were had to be sort of set up so that situations could occur. But a lot of times you didn't have to do that, because it's just unfolding of people's lives. And you can imagine 8 people living together, 8 different opinions, 8 different points of views, 8 different needs and wants. People, things happen. So you didn't really have to manufacture too much. You just had to make sure you were catching the right moments. And then, there's a lot of as there is in Big Brother, there's a lot of confessionals and things like that. But I think the difference between Big Brother is that the world was sheltered, or the people in Big Brother were sheltered from the world. The
Mhm.
people in the loft were not sheltered. They knew everything that was going on. There was, they were just, we were, as you said, it was very much like at TV, or the Truman Show. Like we were just experiencing their lives.
Just like literally real life.
And then you throw in celebrities into it as well. Like we had, there was interviews with like Ja Rule visit the loft at the height of his career, like in the 2000s. Like Eric Lindros showed up, like Vince Carter. Like there, like there was it was still like a bit, weird that you would have people, or like, you know some of the guys would bring back their dates to the loft, and you would see that. So it was just like, it was crazy.
Did you ever go outside of the loft, or it was
Hmm.
literally just you would? Okay, so you would take
Yeah.
cameras out and follow them
Yeah.
to bars or events and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, that not as much, but we did for sure. Like, again, like I can't remember the exact amount, but they had time where they that per week that they were allowed not to have cameras around them. Um, but yeah, like I remember one time, Jen went to, I think it was the NBA All-Star game, and covered that for our things. And sometimes they would go back to their homes to visit people, or like we once saw Rod Stewart at a pub on John Street in downtown Toronto, and we tried to to do an interview with him. So we waited outside the pub, guerrilla style, waiting for him to come out. He said like a few words and waved at us, and that was about it. But still, it was funny.
It's kind of like the rock and roll of TV. It's just like kind of flying by the seat of your pants
Yeah.
and old school like producing style, just
Hmm.
going for it.
Right.
Now you eventually ended up at ET Canada as one of the co-executive producers
Hmm.
of that. How long from the beginning of your career to how
That.
yeah, what was the journey like from PAing on the loft to getting to that point?
Yeah. So let me think. So I guess I left the Lofters ended in 2001. I did a couple other shows after that, a sort of reality type show for design, where two people, a person or a couple was sort of arrested for their bad design styles. And we came in with two new designers, and they would give them a makeover of a room or a house or something. And I worked on a health show for a while, and then there was a new network coming to Toronto called Toronto One, um, which was came over from a West Coast company called Craig Media. So they were big in BC and Alberta, and they were making their first sort of input into Ontario. And they launched a network called Toronto One, which is supposed to be very local, but also was very entertainment driven. So I was there and helped launch the entertainment show there called the A List,
Okay.
which also had a lot of people making their sort of starts, or at least one of the bigger gigs. So Arissa again was on that with me. Dina, who was on breakfast television for 10 years, was one of the hosts. Roz Weston, who worked with me in Entertainment Tonight Canada, Andrew Bain, who's now on the social, and John Nightingale, who does some modeling and acting as well. So yeah, like we did an entertainment show at the time, which was a half-hour daily show as well. And then when so in 2005, the EP of that show, Seb Shalev, who also I worked with at the Lofters, went to Global to launch Entertainment Tonight Canada, and he brought along myself, another producer, Roz, our director, and a couple editors, and we all went over there to Global. So we started that in 2005, and then I became a EP in 2012. So it was 6 to 7 years I was there before I became the EP.
So you were a part of ET Canada from its infancy
I
here.
was day one, yeah.
How exciting, because that was a huge show here in Canada. I know so many people were just heartbroken to
Hmm.
hear about its cancellation. What were you doing on the show before you were an EP?
I started as senior producer in charge of all things news, and also the time before I was helping booking the junkets for movie stars. Then from there, I became supervising producer, so I was in charge of the daily show, making sure it got out to air on time, and was vetting scripts and working with producers on that. And then from there, I became the EP.
Sounds like you got to wear so many different hats and do
Hmm.
so many different things. What was your favorite part of that job?
My favorite part was when we did we did doing a daily show. It can be a bit of a grind, because it is sort of the same thing over and over again. So my favorite parts was when we always did things that were not part of the daily show. So we would produce a red carpet for the Grammys, live before the Grammys that were airing on Global in Canada for 6 or 7 years, and we would always produce the red carpet that aired right before it. So things like that. We did a New Year's Eve show from Niagara Falls for 5 years, which was live and Global as well. So I love that. So those were my favorite part of things when we were in sort of outside of the day to day regular show, and doing something a little different.
You're just like a red carpet guy through and through. Like I hear so
Yes.
much of those red carpets
Yeah.
or these A-list
I
celebrity
know.
type of
I
things.
know.
But I mean, that's fun. Like
It
so
is.
much fun. I did
Mm-hmm.
like the Canada's Walk of
Walk of
Fame
Fame. Yeah.
at once as like a
Okay.
wrangler. And it was
Okay.
really,
Yeah.
really fun. It was a cool atmosphere and there's so much energy in those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool to be around these people who live in just a completely different world
They
than
do.
so many of the rest of us.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
what was the hardest part about that job?
I would say two things. One, before the CRTC changed rules, we were a Canadian content show, so we had to produce 66% of each show had to be Canadian content, which at the time in '05, '06, '07, we was a lot harder than maybe it would be now, because you had you know Goslings and Reynolds and things like that, but they weren't the big stars that they are now. And you
Right.
didn't have as many. Like Bieber was just starting. You didn't have Shawn Mendes yet. You barely had Drake. You didn't have Weekend. Like you just didn't have the at the time the celebrities that we have now. We had a lot, but just in a different way. Like we think it was just more concentrated. So finding ways to fill shows every day and having 2/3 of it being Canadian, and the on the other side of it is like you only allowed 1/3 of a non-Canadian content. So like when you have some big stars to talk to, and you have big news happening in the entertainment world, you can only cover it to so much, because again, you were limited to a certain time.
Mhm.
And then trying to find creative ways to make Canadian content stories happen, and then fighting with CRTC about whether if those things actually counted as Canadian. So that I would say at the beginning that was the hardest. And then as we sort of moved along, and that rule sort of went away, I think the hardest was just convincing celebrities that they needed us as much as we needed them. Sometimes
Mm.
was difficult. And it's not, you obviously don't talk to celebrities, you're talking to people, but like there would be, just there'd be battles between us and eTalk and Q on CBC, and just like, you know, Canada wasn't seen as a major stop for certain, celebrities or certain things. So they would come and maybe do only one interview for the whole country, or they would not even like to only do a red carpet instead of a sit down interview. And we're trying to, fighting always with the trying to prove the value of the show and what we can give them, was always a hard part too.
Do you feel like that changed over time?
It did for a bit, and then I think after COVID, it sort of went back because everything could be done virtually, but also people. I think the rise of social media. I think there was that sort of like 3 or 4 year period before social media became really huge, and where I think we sort of hit our sweet spot with access to celebrities, because they were trying to go move away. We were a very celebrity friendly show. And at the time, like there's a time where like a lot of people spent online just bashing celebrities, and they didn't really have a place to go that felt safe. And I think we were a safe spot for a few years for sure. But then social media came and they had their own outlet, so they didn't need people like us as much anymore. So yeah, I say there is a sweet spot, maybe like '09 to like 14, where we had access to a lot of stars and big stars, and it was good.
You talk about Canadian talent
Mhm.
and how we're seeing more Canadian talent grow and grow, but also simultaneously so much of our Canadian talent ends up moving to the States because there's just more opportunities there. What do you think that Canada could be doing, or what the entertainment industry here in Canada could be doing to better support our Canadian artists?
I think there's a couple things. I think first off, I think our broadcasters and people making in those decision making positions need to take more risk on Canadian content and doing stuff, which is, I know, ironic for me to say this, but I think we need to stop just putting Canada on the end of American shows and calling it Canadian. Obviously I, made my career doing it, and I 100% get it. And, friends with a lot of people who worked like you worked on Big Brother Canada, totally. They were great shows on their own, but I think we need to find different ways of doing it. And because there are a lot of creative people in Canada who don't get their shows made or don't get their shows picked up because people in Canada are afraid to take risks because it hasn't been proven that would be successful. So I think that is one thing, especially from more creative and behind the scenes. And the other is just like we sometimes, even in the news, sort of, I mean, entertainment news, but even in just news in general, and the sort of media coverage of Canadian stars, is that we don't think they're big enough until they make it in the States. So I think we're part of the problem as well too, is that we don't give them um their flowers before they make it big, which I think it was changing. I think, I would say that I think we did a good job of that, and I think he talked to does a good job of that as well, as of giving people who are still making it here in Canada, giving them, time, and I think shows also like Drag Race Canada is a good example of that as well too, like giving people platforms before they become big stars. I think really helped. Yeah, but it needs to be better.
It totally needs to be better.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the benefits of social media. There are so many different ways that artists can now create their own platforms and
Mhm.
demonstrate what they really can do without needing to be backed up by a big network or by a production company or by an agent. You can just
Mhm.
start showing up on social media and really um, let people find you. It's a
Yeah.
powerhouse.
I think there's sometimes the other thing that we, especially from my point of view, because I've really spent the last few years in the digital and social space and changing ET Canada into a powerhouse on both of those digital and social platforms, is looking at data and looking, I think so much beforehand we went with our guts on who we thought was popular, who we thought was a big star. And now you have so much data at your hands, especially on platforms like YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, that you can actually tell what your audience is consuming and knowing what they want. And so some people who you might not think is wouldn't think it maybe is a smaller celebrity, really has a huge following. It might be a little bit more niche, but they have a devoted fan base, and you should be, helping them out and giving them their space.
I think social media for me has really demonstrated how, like, if you think you're weird, there are people out there who love your weird. Like, there's people who
Yeah,
have millions of followers and all they do is like open a box or
right.
you know there
Yeah,
or like the ASMR stuff. I mean,
yeah.
I that's really cool, but it's just like the most random things can find the most random audiences, and just your weirdness has a place in this world, truly. When you learned of ET Canada's cancellation,
Mhm.
what was that experience like for you? Because you had been there for 20 years plus.
Almost, yeah, 17 years. The show was canceled after 18. I was laid off in the layoff just before the show was canceled. Um, yeah, it was definitely a hard day. Sort of two sort of feelings going in when I heard the news. One was like sort of what we already talked about, like this is such a mistake for a few reasons. One, you know, through our digital revenue and our sponsorship revenue, ET Canada was still making money. It was, still doing well. So I was surprised that I expected at some point they were going to cancel the show and keep it digital going, but I was very surprised that they canceled everything. Also, just for the fact is what we talked about is that like there is very limited outlets in Canada for the Canadian Star System and for promoting homegrown talent, and taking away a major one, I thought did a disservice for not only the people who worked in the show but the industry in general. Um, because we did like one of the things I was very proud of at ET Canada is that we didn't care which network shows aired on or things like that. We would cover CBC shows, we would cover Bell shows, we cover APTN shows. Like it didn't matter to us. We just wanted to cover Canadian stories. And I think that also, as companies get smaller, like as there's less and less companies out there, I think people are so wanted to promote their own so much more that again, like you don't. It's better, I think, for a show or especially for a TV show. It's better if they have someone who isn't their network promoting it, because you're getting a whole new, possibly eyeballs on it that you wouldn't get otherwise. If you're still just like if Rogers is only promoting Rogers shows, they're only going to be re-promoting to an audience they already have. Well, if we had a show like what we had did, that we were promoting promoting a show in front of an audience they didn't have yet. So and then the other feeling for me was because there was a pretty big layoff before the cancellation. 14 or 15 of us were let go. It made it finally allowed, especially I felt myself, it allowed me to sort of connect back with some of my former coworkers, because now we were going through the same thing. I think before, when you get laid off and the show continues, it's sometimes hard to reconnect with your people you used to see on a daily basis, because they have the show, they're moved on, right? They're moved on. You have to go through your, you know, emotions of being let go and all that sort of stuff. So you don't want to feel like you're bothering them if are feeling bad about being let go and things like that. So this way, I think it was a nice sort of community feeling, that we were all in this together.
Community can make a world of a difference at every stage of our lives, but especially when navigating something like grief,
Mhm.
which is kind of the feeling of being let go, especially when you've committed 17 years to a certain place. I'm sure that
Yeah.
felt like a second home, and you knew
Mhm.
these people and you knew what was expected. Can you describe what kind of thoughts or mental health challenges you faced during that time? How did you care for yourself during that?
Yeah, it is a hard experience. I think the hardest thing I had for me was the sort of two oppositions sort of going at each other. You had, once this sort of news came out that you were let go or things like that, you have so many people, especially on things like LinkedIn and things like that, saying like, you'll get a job, no problem. You'll get, people will be lucky to work with you, all this sort of positive feedback, and which feels nice in the moment. But then you struggle to find something like, I've gone, almost a year and a half without a full-time gig. I've done a lot of consulting works and a lot of contract works, which is great, but nothing has been full-time since then. So like you hear the words, but you don't see the action sometimes. Like, so it's hard. And I'm not blaming anyone at all. It's just like, you it's hard to then start believing what they're saying positive about you when you don't see any action, right? And then like if this in for me like is like if this many people in the industry and some of them are, leaders in this industry think so highly of me, why is it so hard for me to land a full-time gig? Are they just not being honest, or like is what is it like? So you start questioning your own self-worth a bit. You get beat down a bit. I think things that have helped me, I've seen a therapist, done a career coach, um and I think the and just trying to continue to be creative and still fuel that passion for creating content, which I still have, is sort of like a good outlet as well too.
I so relate to what you just shared there.
Mm.
I just recently gotten a job, but I was just going through 6 months of straight unemployment, and
Right.
two, like all these thoughts of like, am I not meant to be in this? Like, do people
Hmm.
just think I suck? Or like I was having tons of interviews
Right.
that I would leave feeling like, oh, this was a great interview. I for sure got that. And then it wouldn't happen. And I started to feel like I was crazy. Like,
Right.
is it ever gonna happen? And I too work with a therapist and coach, and I think they support us in that ability to keep showing up even in the hardest
Hmm.
times, to feel supported, because we're not meant to be doing this by ourselves. Like
No.
it's you need that sense of community. And honestly, I feel like you being open and vulnerable about this will help so many people who are struggling right now. Like our industry is really, really struggling right now.
Hmm.
And to hear that someone with your resume and your experiences are also struggling to find work right now, I hope it resonates with someone listening who needs to hear it, that it has nothing to do with you.
Right.
Like we have no control over what the industry is doing, but you can control how you show up. And
Yeah.
you're doing the therapy, you're finding your own creative outlets, and that's amazing. What are some of those creative outlets? Like how do you stay in touch with that during these times?
Yeah. Well, one thing is I've been working on a lot of different show ideas and pitching show ideas. That's a big part of that. Um, I wrote, yeah. So prior to being laid off, I'd written a children's book, and it was published. And finished my second one, but have yet to done anything with it. I sort of created this Instagram account called the 365-day playlist, where every day I counted down what I thought were the 365 best songs of all time. So I did a post on that every day. So things like that sort of kept me going. I still like write, sometimes try to write scripts, and just writing in general helps out a lot. Um, and at the same time, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because especially with pitching shows, is that there's so much rejection, and it's had such a big impact on me, and not in a good way.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
That's okay. It's not your fault.
But yeah, rejection is a huge part about being a creative, especially if
Hmm.
you're pitching ideas or you're developing ideas. And I think, one of the things that makes it so painful is that when you're creating something and you're birthing something into this space, it's like your baby. It's like your
Hmm.
thought baby. And it can
Hmm.
be really vulnerable to share that. And then to have it rejected over and over again can just again make you feel like, am I crazy, or feel like misunderstood. When you do get these rejections, how do you cope in that moment?
Um, it's tough. Like I think in the inner critic and the voices in my head have been a lot louder over the last 12 months or so than what they ever have been before. Um, so yeah, it's definitely tough in the moment hearing rejection. Sometimes you just have to remember what you just said. It's not you. It's not, something you did. But after you get a lot of them, um, it's hard to make that argument logical
Mhm.
every time. So, a lot of times what I do is sort of, go back to the drawing board and try again or try somewhere else or like there's been a couple ideas I so believe in that, I just think they should come to air at some point, and I just have so much passion for them that I don't take no for an answer. So which could be part of maybe part of the reasons why I don't get things because people are like, this guy's annoying. Who knows? But maybe I don't know.
Being annoying is kind of a part of being a producer. I say my
Mhm,
opinion is like you just got to keep showing up and being
mhm.
like, no, I believe in this 110%,
Yeah.
and demand to be seen in a
Eh,
certain way.
Yeah, and I think even before I was laid off, I during the pandemic, I pitched the show idea to someone, and they barely gave me the time of day and didn't like it. And then 6 to 7 months later, a very similar version of the show I pitched was airing on TBS in the States. And I wrote back to them and said, I know we turned this down, but like I just wanted to, I was hoping to get some sort of feedback back saying, yes, this is a great idea. We should have did it, something like that. Just something. But
Yeah.
instead I got, yeah, it was good for them, but it's not meant for us. And to me, that wasn't an answer. Like it was just like, okay, that was you're one person who thought this. Like
Mhm.
again, that goes back to what we talked about, but we just don't give people chances here, and it's very frustrating. And I'm not just saying this me personally. Like I've talked to so many people in the industry, and they are saying the same thing. Like you would think, and that you see also on LinkedIn, like people just getting out of the industry because they're not getting the chances that they deserve.
Oh, 100%. Um, to that point, I recently interviewed for like a very junior level, like story AP position for a show that was coming over. I'd worked on this show on the Canadian format for multiple years.
Yeah.
I was a perfect fit for this position, and I found out that one of my mentors, like a person 20 years my senior in this industry, who's way above qualified, like she's like a series
Mhm.
producer, like amazing, she took the job.
Right. Yeah.
And like she had to, because that was money. That's a
Mhm.
job, it's a job.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show like I remember feeling that moment like, how am I possibly going to compete against people with so much more experience than me? And that can feel really scary, but like yes, people are needing to take jobs that maybe aren't their ideal
Mhm.
positions or what they exactly want right now, because the industry is struggling. And
Yeah.
if you are struggling and you are listening to this, I hope you are finding comfort in this conversation, because
Mhm.
you are so deeply, deeply not alone.
No.
What I've kind of developed in my own strategy in navigating, because I man, I've received so much more rejection in the past 6 months than my entire 8 years as a filmmaker in
Right.
this. And I started applying, I call it my GPS system.
Okay.
It's a grounding, processing, strategizing. So like every time I get that rejection, I allow myself to feel the shit,
Right. Okay.
cry,
Yeah.
let it out. Sometimes I'm calling my friends like, "Can
Right.
you believe this?" Or, I'm going for a walk and I'm crying or I'm journaling or whatever it may be. I just let it out, and then I ground myself in some kind of way, whether that's going for a walk, using some breathing
Mhm.
techniques, leaning on the strategies that just calm my system down. Then I process the thoughts, all of those negative thoughts that are coming
Right.
of the job is never going to happen or you're not talented enough. I ask myself if they're true. I
Hmm.
try and find evidence that it's true. And oftentimes I cannot. And I remind myself that I am talented and worthy of being in this space and that it's going to happen eventually. And then strategize. What is my next step?
Right.
What new door can I walk through? What is the action I can take? And I just use that over and over again to navigate those hard things. You got to let yourself feel the shit
Hmm.
and then find your power to keep moving forward. We've been talking about how we manage our mental well-being in the unemployed space, but we
Hmm.
also know that being on set itself and in a job can be extremely high stress and high pressure. When
Hmm.
you are working in that kind of pressure cooker, how do you manage and care for your mental well-being?
Um, a couple ways. I think again, like having a therapist is great. I think also if you can find some one of the struggles of working in this industry is that it's so different than other industries. So sometimes when you go to a career coach or life coach or even a therapist, like I think you need to find one who understands the industry and the sort of insiderness of this industry because it is quite different and the egos and the opinions and things like in this industry is so much different. So having someone who knows that context definitely helps. um Also what you said, like community, like having someone who you can trust and could be there when you need to sort of like just get things off your chest and know that it's just going to not go anywhere. It's just you're getting it out and then letting it happen. And the other thing is just sort of um compassion, right? I think you need to be compassionate to everyone you work with and realize that as much as stuff that you're going through, people are going through stuff too, and you can't um ignore that, and you can't sort of um punish people for things that are sort of out of their control as well, right? So I think definitely having compassion for people, and you know I try my best as a leader, and it's a simple thing that that I'm sure parents have said to kids all the time, like treat people how you want to be treated. And think that is very good advice. I know it's so simple, but I try my best to treat people the way that I want to be treated, from a leader down. So and celebrate people when they do great stuff. Like make sure they know that you know. I think maybe one of my struggles as a leader was not um I thought I was doing always enough praising, but you get feedback sometimes about you don't praise enough, or maybe you have to realize how different people need praising differently. Some people want to be the one you shout out in front of a group of of their peers. Other people just want to be told quietly by themselves. Some people just want to be have a nice email. Like it depends. So like it's also knowing your staff well enough to know how they want to be recognized and appreciated.
Firstly, thank you for validating my work as a life coach. I know you weren't talking about
No.
me, but
Right.
I love, I that's what I try and do as a coach
Mhm.
myself is like I have all of this television background, so I just totally understand the complexities of this industry and the fact that you use a coach too to help you just like I think that is so wonderful and I'm so happy that you do that for yourself. So thanks for that shout out. But also like yeah, the compassion that you bring, I hope that the compassion you give to your peers is also something that you give to yourself.
That's the hard part,
And
right? That is the
yes,
hard part. Like my last sort of couple sessions with my therapist has been about self-compassion and trying to give it to yourself, uh, it is so hard, and I still nowhere close being good at it.
it is, but it's a practice, it's a
Mm,
skill, and you just got to keep showing up and practicing that muscle, just like a gym rat or an athlete is going to go in and they're going to practice those movements and those strength moments. Like this is practice for our mind,
mhm.
and you showing up and doing that practice, it'll eventually reap the rewards and soon it will become something a little bit more
Right.
easy. So I mentioned before that I have appreciated having mentors in my corner. Did you have any mentors when you were growing in this industry, and do you mentor any upcoming producers, and why do you think mentorship is important?
Yeah, so I think a bit yes to both. I would say my first mentor was actually back in high school, was a teacher called Mrs. McNeely. She gave me it was sort of like a co-op position I had where I was a very shy child, and she helped me build the confidence to sort of lead her classroom and do things for her. So that really gave me confidence to sort of be where I am now. In the industry, I've had a bunch. My former Seb Shalev, who launched the Lofters, allowed me just to, every time I worked for him, just allowed me to be creative and do things. And actually, one of the few people that allowed me to take risks on things that maybe other people wouldn't. Barb Williams, who has I've worked for at places where she's been the leader at for years, also was someone who always was there to listen to ideas and give her advice on it and just be a supportive leader. And she, you know, so many leaders who are at the top don't, reach down or praise down to people at sort of the on the floor doing the day-to-day work. And Barb was not that person. She was always there. And then Tamara Simino, probably taught me the most about being a manager and being a leader. She, would give me ways to help solve problems when people brought them to you. Made you realize that things didn't have to be solved every day. Things could sometimes you could take space and think about it and allow, sort of the next day to sort of figure things out, or things would look different in a new light. So I do appreciate that. And
Learning
then
to
yeah,
take a beat.
yeah, right? Things can take a beat, right? They don't have to be solved right away. As much as someone thinks they need to be, you can walk away and make a, have a thought about it and come back with a clearer head, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I one of the things I really loved about Entertainment Tonight Canada was I at least I felt like I was a mentor to some people, and seeing people grow. We had interns that came throughout the history of the show. So, and we had one intern who was an intern near the beginning, and by the end of the show, he was one of our main directors. We have a few interns who became top producers on the show. There's two, since the show has ended. There's two producers who've gone off to create their own sort of media company, and I've been helping them from just always not always there to give advice if they want it, to answer questions that they might have. So I do feel like I have, and even like the Laura, who I was became the co-executive producer with for the last couple of years at UTCAD. She started off on my team and made her way up, and seeing her grow like that just was amazing. So yeah, I feel like you have to be a mentor when you're in a leadership position. You have to, you know, you can't just be someone who is assigning things and giving people feedback on what they do. You need to be there to help them move ahead and do that. And I think also most leaders should always have in the back of their heads who is their replacement. Um, and so from a on a broadcast side I had Laura, and then on a digital side I had Kate, who I would definitely trying to give her as much information and insight into what I do and knowledge that I had, that if the time came, that she would be able to step into my shoes.
So you're training your replacements?
Try maybe not training so much, but making sure that they have like all the information. Knowing, I think again, like it goes back to, I think people need to be transparent with each other, especially I think leaders who are transparent, as difficult as the news might be, or as good as the news might be, I think are the best. And I think sometimes that's where I failed as a leader. Sometimes that I had trouble not always giving people the bad news in a straightforward manner. And sometimes it's difficult as a leader to
Right.
tell somebody who's working on a certain path that they've maybe hit their peak and at this show that there wasn't anywhere else for them to go, but doesn't mean they wouldn't be able to do it somewhere else. Just the way the show was structured and the way the organization was, like there was nothing else I could do. And I think sometimes I maybe gave false hope to people that they didn't that they still had a chance if they kept on working hard. Um, there's some things I do regret, but there were definitely a couple of people who I, wanted to make sure that I thought for sure could easily take take my role and make sure they knew as much as they could.
You sound like a very generous leader.
Thank you.
And in my opinion, generous leaders are the best kind of leaders, the ones who just want to give and share and lift people up rather than feeling this sense of competitiveness of,
Hmm.
I did it this way and it was so hard and I did it on my own. So you got to do it on your own. And rather than, sharing the gifts. And you sound
Hmm.
like you really do want to share this with many. And that is just, I would happily work on your team.
Thank you.
um, as growing yourself in this industry and seeing many grow over the years, what would you say are some of the skills that you need to have in order to be successful in this?
Um, I think the willingness to learn is definitely a big skill, and I think again, when I look back at some of the interns who made it in their career, what is the sort of common theme about all of them is that they went and went and tried to learn as much as they could in the time that they were there. They would not say, and I'm not saying, we not saying that they were worked, to the bone, but they would not say no to things. They would, be willing. They wanted to try everything. They wanted to learn. They soaked it all up. I think that part is so important because it can impress people so much. The fact that you want to be good. Um, working hard, obviously, and I think also just like not being afraid to give your ideas, no matter how big or small they are, I think is good, especially in the creative industry, because it can lead to some great collaboration. It can be like, somebody might just have like a seed of an idea, and if you're in a brainstorm meeting or you're in a room with a couple other people, it can come and become such an amazing thing. And then making sure that you don't have to have the answers yourself, but surround yourself with people who can give you the answers. So like if you don't know anything about editing and talk to an editor, or like if you're going on a shoot and I would, when you're going to shoot, make sure you bring when you're doing the brainstorm or the planning meeting or just like the meeting before the shoot, it's not just you and the talent, it's you, the talent, the camera person, it's the editor who's working on it, it's maybe the graphics team, someone from the graphics team, so that everyone is sort of knows what the goal is at the beginning of it, instead of like trying to explain people what the things is. And they can also then troubleshoot and say like, this is not going to work from a post-production standpoint if you do it that way, or the camera person can be like, this is not going to work from my point of view if we do this way, can we try this? So I think if you don't know the answers, talk to someone. Don't be afraid to say I don't know the answers.
I love that. I think it's very on par with what I say, which is curiosity. Like, just
Mm,
be the most curious person in that room. Don't be
yeah.
afraid to ask questions. And like, if you have, I think one of the things that really helped me grow in my career, because I didn't go to film school for this, I entered
Right.
hustling from a PA job, is just like, if you have downtime on set, ask people questions,
Yeah.
like talk to the grab, ask them. Like, I love hearing about people's hero journeys. Like, how did you
Mhm.
get here? Like, why do you love being an audio person? Or
Right.
why do you how does the lighting system work? Why did you choose that? Like, just get super curious. And if you have these chances to make these connections with people, not only are you growing your network, because everyone loves to talk about themselves,
Right.
A, and B, you're learning. And then when you get up to those higher positions, you'll have already this basis of understanding of how
Hmm.
these other departments work.
Hmm.
Is there any moment in your career where you made a significant mistake or made a choice that you really learned from, and it made it this one flaw or this one falter just completely, the lesson you reaped from it changed you significantly in any way?
I think one really early in my career, I was working in a live control room, and it was maybe my second or third time as a live control room producer. And, I was definitely a bit cocky and I thought I was handling it under control pretty well. Um, and I had an executive producer at the time who wanted some changes made to the show as it was happening, and I didn't agree with those changes. And she kept on coming into the control room saying, let's make this change, let's make this change. And then, she's like, I'm gonna re-edit a piece of tape and all this sort of stuff. And every time she came into the room, it sort of distracted the crew, and took me away from being in it and being able to talk to the talent, who are on camera. And finally, at one point, she came back in, and I had just lost it. And I said, in a very non friendly way, that she needs to leave the control room. Um, and not come back until the show's done. Which she listened to and didn't come back until the show was done. But I had to do it because I knew that if I kept on being distracted, I would lose control of the show, and then lose control, and the people, the crew and the talent would not have that person they need to go to. Because I think as a in live television, there needs to be someone who's sort of the person that everyone goes to say, what now? And that's sort of your job as a producer in that situation. So I knew I couldn't do my job properly that unless this distraction was not there anymore. Afterwards, she called me into the office, and I thought for sure I was gonna get fired as a punk kid. And she said, "Never talk to your executive producer like that ever again."
It was your
I'm like,
EP that you yelled
yeah,
at to get.
yeah, I know.
Okay.
Um, never talk to your EP like that again. And then we had a conversation about why I reacted that way and that sort of thing. And I just explained sort of similar what I just told you. And afterwards, she I think she got some of it. I think at the time she's in a who knows who was in the right or wrong. I think she still thinks she thought she was in the right. I still thought I was in the right. Um, and yeah, so I what I sort of took away from that, and then afterwards, I think our relationship was better than it ever was, and we never had a moment like that again. Um,
Which I think is a testament to both of you. Like,
mhm,
it's a testament to her as a leader,
yeah,
bringing you in and having a conversation with you and letting you know where her boundaries are, but also
yeah,
opening up to understand what was happening in that moment and develop that conversation. Like, kudos to her and you for
yeah.
participating in that conversation.
Yeah,
Genuinely.
yeah. So yeah, I think to me, that could have gone a lot worse for me than what it did. But I do think it allowed me, as you sort of said, like to sort of set like what my boundaries are, but also at the same time understand that other people have boundaries, and you sort of have to play with them as well. Like you have to respect them.
So, what was the lesson you reap from that? Don't yell at your EP or.
Uh, that I think the lesson I learned from that is that two things can be right at the same time.
Ooh.
Yeah. I think, at the same time, the show would have been better if what she wanted to happen happened. But at the same time, if it did, it could have turned into it could have been chaos, right? Like we could have, again, like I was working with people who maybe weren't the most strongest in a live environment. So I didn't think they would be able to handle change as easily as what was expected from them. So, but I do think probably at the end of the day, her idea was probably the right idea, but it's just I don't think it could have gotten executed properly. So,
But I love that lesson of like two things can be right at the same time. Like
mhm,
your idea could be right and her idea could be right. Like they both could be right. You can only
mhm,
go with one, but both can be right. And I think
exactly.
especially as creatives and you're pitching ideas and you're showing up and you're expressing your creative vision, if other people don't like that, they can be right for
Yeah,
them
yeah,
and you can still be right in what you're doing and what you're trying to create, and just because someone doesn't like it doesn't mean that that is your truth,
right.
and you can keep going. And I
Mhm,
just think that's a really great lesson to be reaping from that.
mhm.
You have extensive experience in this industry, as we have mentioned. Where do you think the future of TV is going? We're seeing so much change right now with streaming, really changing the game in terms of our funding and how we make money from our creations. What do you see the future of television and digital media?
Um, well, to put it in context of it, like in 2015 or 2016, when we made a big switch at ET Canada to become a digital first show. Up
What
until
does
that
that
moment.
mean
So
exactly?
yeah, so up until that moment, a lot of people, especially in broadcast, thought, things on social and digital didn't go up until after the broadcast aired. So they didn't, you didn't want take away from your audience by giving them stuff too early.
I see.
We sort of, turned that on its head and put things up as fast as we could get it, and realized that this is a different audience than what is broadcast. And if they really did if you really liked, Taylor Swift or Tom Cruise, it didn't matter if you saw the interview at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're still going to watch it at 7 o'clock because you're a big fan, or it might be packaged in a different way where it's just different. So it didn't matter. It didn't change our audience. Like it all it did was grew an audience on a different platform. It grew an audience on a digital social platform and did not sort of take away from the broadcast audience, other than what was already happening with broadcast television itself. Was just like people are cutting cord and people are leaving broadcast television, but it wasn't because of what you did on digital. So what I thought at the time, and I still think now, is that it's it's still all about content. It's just the platforms are different. And I think really where it's going back to is where we were in the 80s, where people went through this thing where they got rid of cable and all this stuff, and now they have so many different streamers. They're almost like channels, right? So now, you're basically, and there's going to be, you'll see, sorry, starting in America, I'm sure you're seeing in Canada, that you're getting these bundles of channels. So now you can buy Paramount Plus, Disney, and Netflix together, and so you have these three channels with content on it. And then when you look at other social media platforms like Meta and YouTube, one of the things that they are so big on is making sure that you're consistent when content comes out, just like you used to be on TV and schedule. So they want your audience to know that at 12 o'clock on a Friday, a new episode is going to drop on YouTube, or at 2 o'clock on a Saturday, you're going to get something new on Meta every single week. And so it's taking a lot of the old things that made television successful in the first place and putting in a different sort of platform and different model. So really the content is still the same, just the distribution is different. And I think as soon as people, especially I think companies are coming along to this a lot more, but I think they need to realize that they need to invest as much content on digital and social, invest in it as much as they do on broadcast, because it is the same thing. It's still, people are still watching it, and it shouldn't be treated cheaply just because of the platform it goes on.
Do you think we'll ever get like one? Because I totally hear what you're saying, and like we're kind of going back to cable, but like a streaming type of platform way. And
Yeah.
I can't keep paying for all of these different
No, you can't, right?
subscriptions.
No.
Do you think we'll ever get just like one of like Netflix just owns the monopoly, and then we just get like you just have that and it has everything on it? Or do you think we'll always have these
I think
competitors?
we always have to have competitors in television. Otherwise, there is no desire to be different or try things, right? I think if there's a monopoly, then it's bad for everyone.
I would love to see
Oh,
Blockbuster come back.
yes, right?
I don't think we'll ever get back into that. Like everything is too easily accessible now. But honestly, it's almost like an overwhelming amount of choices. I
It
miss the
is, yeah.
days of going to Blockbuster with your family on a Friday night. Yeah, you try and get the new releases. You hope it's not sold out, and
Right?
you pick a couple movies, and then you dedicate your time. I miss
Yeah.
like that's such a nostalgic time. It TV has just changed and transformed so much now. It's like you could be in the living room watching your show, and
Right.
each kid is in their own rooms on their iPads watching their
Yeah.
own, and
Yeah, for
the
sure.
experience of viewing that is all very different.
Hmm. And then from a content side, I think it's just again like about doing things that are a little bit different. Like if you look at the shows that are the most successful, or they're all, shows that weren't done before. So like The Bear, like, Miss Maisel, things like that. Like they were all things that were a little bit different and things that they like it, it's not the, sixth spin-off of CSI that's going to be, what's driving people to different platforms. Sure, they're fun to watch and things are great to watch, but it's really you can see as like when things have even Barbie and Oppenheimer, like those are two different stories that two studios took a chance on, and look how well that did.
What keeps you motivated in this industry? What keeps you inspired to keep going even during these really tough times?
A couple things. One, I think we're very lucky as creators, especially TV and people working TV and film, most so TV. The fact that people consume our content in the most intimate places in their houses or in their lives. To think that's something you worked on all day or worked on for months end up being watched when a family gets together on a couch and watches something on their in their basement TV, or someone is in their room watching it on their laptop. The fact that they're watching something you created in that such an intimate spot is just it blows my mind that that can happen. And I think not too many people get that sort of ability or reaction. So I think that definitely to keep on being able to do that is one. The other is that I just think, as much as the nose, as much as I hate the nose and as much as they are painful, I want to prove people wrong sometimes. I want, like again, like there have been certain people who have definitely given me chances, and every time I think that they have, I think I've done a good job at proving them right by giving me a chance. That I when people don't, um, when people do reject or don't sort of give me the green light, then it does make me want to prove them wrong.
I love that fire underneath you. You're
Yeah,
like, "Oh, you think I can't do this?
yeah,
Watch me." That
yeah.
kind of energy is fantastic. And I love that beautiful idea of like people consuming your art in these intimate spaces. Like, what a
Hmm.
beautiful image and a thought to have. Jody,
Right.
thank you so much for coming on and being so vulnerable. I know that it sucks to be unemployed, but I know that your vulnerability and how you shared in this conversation for sure is going to bring comfort to a lot of people who are in a similar boat. There are so many creatives struggling right now. So
Hmm.
thank you very much for your candidness in this conversation.
Thank you, Jess.
Now time for the legal stuff. This podcast is presented to you solely for educational and entertainment purposes. I may be a professionally certified coach myself, but hosting a podcast is not coaching. This podcast should not be used in substitution of working with a licensed therapist, doctor, coach, or other qualified professionals. Copy that? Amazing. See you on the next episode. Nothing but love, Jess.